I think there's been a lot of discussion before this. Many of us are aware that there's clearly the market, which is local for the 22 million people that live here and the distribution center networks that feed off of that. But then there's that national gateway function for the region where that competitiveness matters, where it's potential for other regions to act as a substitute gateway for this region to serve those markets that are closer to them. And so I guess really my chief question is, how much does this region have control over those factors that are going to ultimately determine that market share? And importantly, from the discussions earlier today, you know, how much of those jobs and the income of the region that we have that are associated with serving those other parts of the country are we going to be able to hold on to through the policies that we adopt, especially in the public sector?
That's a great question. To sit here and tell you we have control over any of this is wrong. We don't, not by ourselves. But for us to understand how can we better meet the challenges for the future, we need to understand the goods movement system, the logistics systems. And for that, I'm proud to say that we have underway studies at SCAG, and we have done studies to understand it more. For example, what's the most likely market that we're going to lose? It is the intermodal part. I call them the things that does not require transloading, the things that just comes to the port and goes through our region to the rest of the country. And that's about 40%. But all indication from data is that that share is declining, and the transloading share that ends up getting in our transportation system, getting to the warehousing, is increasing. And understanding that fact is going to help us have more of control, but we're never going to have full control. That's one. Number two, the public sector doesn't have control. The private sector doesn't have control. Yes, the private sector, for example, have control over pricing the rates of shipping things. And the public sector probably have control over doing certain processes to get there. But the two together have more control over how we deal with this issue. So to have a better control, we needed to have a better understanding of how the system works, and we do. And the Find the Panama Canal strategy, or the future strategies for our port, is going to be based on our complete understanding that not one entity have control, but all of us will.
All right, I completely agree with that, but let me ask a follow-up question, maybe refining it a little bit, which is, how much can those decisions that are made, albeit influenced by a number of factors, how can they be influenced by the regional policies that are adopted? I mean, ultimately, there is a great influence, especially if we look on out into the future as a consequence of the policies that are adopted through the planning process and through the political process in the region.
Well, of course, the policies that's adopted will have a great influence in how things move forward. Having said that, we do not just adopt policies just to adopt policies. We adopt policies to respond to certain things. I would argue that those arguments that if you charge me, I'm going to go somewhere else, or if you don't do that for me, I'm going to go somewhere else. I think the biggest challenges of the regional policies right now, it is the lack of funding to fulfill the ability to implement those regional policies. It's not that the regional policies are not good for the system. So if we manage to figure out a way to get funding and governance structure to move forward, I do think these regional policies will benefit and make us have more control and be more competitive with other regions.
Great. I understand this is representing more than NFI, but also your clients, your customers, who in many cases are not in transportation. They're shippers that use it. They're buying your services. You mentioned already some of their attitudes, perhaps misinformed about the current business climate, but what's going to be the consequence of that in your view? Is this, from where you see it from your customers, do you expect to see import and export activity growth in Southern California that will match the rest of the country, or is this region going to lose market share?
I think the key point there is whether it's aligned with national growth. None of us know which way how soon the market's going to turn around, how we're going to grow, but I'm anticipating less growth aligned with national growth in the market, as long as there's uncertainty and concerns about regulatory compliance and other things that can affect my clients' supply chains. I think that as long as that condition exists, they will look to displace volume into other areas, and they've been very clear in that area. Now, unfortunately, as a national provider, it may not be a death knell for our business with those clients. It simply means they want to not put their eggs in one Southern California basket.
Could you elaborate a little more on some of those risks? For example, is it threats of congestion? Is it the risk of having unreliability in the system, or is it just pure a cost issue in terms of layered on fees? And is it a perception issue rather than something that they can actually show you on paper in terms of what it's doing to their business? Or is it some mix of all?
It's certainly a mix, and it always is. The regulatory compliance and the the cost of managing from a distance in many cases. Many of my clients are based elsewhere in the country, so they rely on people like myself to warn them and keep them informed of potential changes. They quickly pull out their calculators and try to determine whether or not they can establish what a potential cost would be. The math will always be less informed than you'd like, and they tend to lean towards worst case scenario. So something as simple as AB 32 and and a new regulation coming, you got people calculating what the cost of fairings are going to be and whether they can fuel out of state and come into the state, and all these different things pile up. So you have the risks of port productivity, let's say, and the ability to move goods through the port quickly, and they talk about these ships slowing down coming into the port. And as you add these things up, and they don't feel that they're suffering from them in other areas, they continue to shift from as I said earlier, a focus from let's bring it in the West, let's hold the goods there, and do delayed fulfillment on a demand basis to retail and end consumer, even if it's direct-to-consumer fulfillment. I am seeing a very large shift in the psychology of let's move as much elsewhere as possible and mitigate risk in other areas. I personally don't believe that the change in the Panama Canal is going to have as big an impact as many do, and that's a personal opinion. I think that in that area, we're not going to see everybody just saying, let's go to the east because of the canal and the great deals that somebody's offering in Savannah. But I think it's another gradual erosion in confidence in Southern California until things stabilize and there's more clear improvement.
Thank you. I think that I'm glad you addressed the Panama question. Can I ask you to broaden it a little bit? Do they perceive other things such as Prince Rupert or other developments in terms of making land bridge service, say perhaps out of Puget Sound? Is there other competitive routes that perhaps don't get the prominence of Panama that matter to your customer?
There are. Everybody runs the numbers as best they can with their sometimes good education, sometimes theory, and sometimes some trade journal support. So it depends on how sophisticated you are. My clients have predominantly focused on east-west, have not talked about Seattle, have not talked about this Mexico port. For my clients, good movement is very frequently very critical on time to market. And it's all about speed. They're trying to eliminate costs in the supply chain, so they still have a just-in-time mentality, and they want to bring it in quickly. And that's why a delay of a couple of days that's unanticipated, and you're missing your ship window and your required delivery dates with retail clients that has all kinds of other economic downside to it, is important. They want reliability, repetitive reliability, and if they know about it up front, I don't think we're going to find any other port to be more competitive than these ports in LA and Long Beach. It's the risk of losing 4 days because of, and put together the list of what could occur that would delay goods movement for some number of days, whether it be a port issue, a highway infrastructure issue, the home pass delay on intermodal, and now they start to think about maybe I should have had my goods closer to market sooner, which adds cost to supply chain.